fear that the other person is going to spot any flaw and point it out, or roll their eyes, or cluck their tongue, or walk away, or say something demeaning. It's not going to happen. They're perfect. And so there's no shame, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Is that the point? I don't think so. It's true. I just don't think it's the point. For 3 reasons. Number 1, no matter how beautiful or handsome you are, it takes more than that to feel safe and free from any shaming. You not only have to be that way, but that other person has to be morally upright and gracious. Because you know well that no matter how good you are, no matter how beautiful you are, a shaming kind of person, a blaming kind of person will kick you verbally. They will get at you another way. It's not enough for you to present yourself flawlessly. That will not make you free from being shamed. And you all know it if you had any experience in life. So, even though they're both perfect here, I doubt that he's drawing attention to the perfection of their bodies. Second reason, Genesis 2:24-25 are intended to provide foundational wisdom for marriage after this fall. We know that because Jesus quotes this verse. It's the foundational verse in the New Testament for talking about marriage. So in God's mind, as He gives verse 24 and 25, He has Jesus in mind, and He has all the use that will be made of it after the fall. So if it only had a meaning relevant to perfect bodies, it wouldn't be much use to us later. Don't think that's what's going on here. Third reason, verse 24 creates the relationship where verse 25 can happen. That's the flow of the verses. Verse 24, man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife. They become one flesh, which creates the situation of security where naked and not ashamed can happen. It flows out of this covenant keeping. I'm cleaving to you. I'm one flesh with you. I am in this with you forever. There is the place where it can happen, naked and not ashamed. That's the point, I think. So here's possibility number 1. All that was to say no to option number 1, namely the reason it says naked and not ashamed is because they're flawless and have nothing to be ashamed of. And I'm saying that's not the point. It's true, it's just not the point, because the point has to do with how it flows out of covenant keeping, leaving, cleaving, one flesh. You're mine, I'm yours, we're one. Now that leads to verse 25. And so the point here, I think, is not that freedom from shame in marriage flows where each can present the other flawless or as good as we can do, but rather it flows from the nature of covenant love. This is the point of marriage. On the one hand, you can say, I'm perfect and have nothing to be ashamed of. And on the other, you say, I'm imperfect, but I have no fear of being disapproved by my wife or spouse. In the first case, you would say, we are shame-free because we're perfect. In the other, you would say, I'm free from shame based on the gracious nature of the covenant love that flows in this family. In the one case, you would say, we're free from shame because we're flawless. And in the other case, you would say, there's no shame because covenant love covers a multitude of sins. A multitude of flaws. Covers it. Doesn't see it. Now, I know that Genesis 2:25 is before the fall, and nothing bad had happened for them to overlook. They didn't have to overlook anything in verse 25 because they hadn't sinned, and God made everything good and said it was very good, and so I assume their bodies were gorgeous. And so I'm not saying that this overlooking is happening here. I'm saying God, this is last week's sermon, God planned for verse 24 to be about Jesus and His cross. Leaving His Father, cleaving to His bride, becoming one spirit with her at the cost of His life. That's what verse 24 is pointing toward, and marriage is an emblem of that, a parable of that, a drama of that, a display of that. That's the meaning of marriage. And therefore, I'm saying that Naked and Not Ashamed gets its deepest grounding from the nature of covenant love, which we learn to be, I pass over sin. And that's how you stay married. Next week, Lord willing, I intend to take with all my might the doctrine of justification and show you how it saves marriages. I don't count sin. That's covenant love. And it creates, yes it can, and we'll talk about when it does and when it doesn't. It creates a place where it can happen again, naked and not ashamed. It's not because we're flawless. It's because covenant love can really happen. Jesus' bride is filthy. He laid down His life for her. She backslides continually. She's like you in your relation to Jesus. And He comes after her again and again and again. Justification by faith alone creates a vertical peace with God, and justification by faith alone at the horizontal level can create an amazing naked and not ashamed. An imperfect husband, an imperfect wife, full of flaws, naked and not ashamed. It's a miracle. Marriage is a miracle. The world doesn't understand marriage. They don't have a clue what marriage is about. It's about Christ. It's about covenant love. It's about the display of the glory of God in redeeming a bride. That's what marriage is. So that's where we're going next week. But first, we got to finish figuring out naked and not ashamed. They got clothed in 2 stages. Let's read about that. What does that mean for us? Set it up. Genesis 2:17. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for on the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, I take the knowledge of good and evil to be a phrase that represents a declaration of independence from God. So, when they eat of this tree, they are declaring, God is no longer my Lord. God doesn't decide what's right and wrong for me. I decide good and evil for me. That's what the knowledge of good and evil means. I eat this, and now I'm the decider of good and evil, not God. So let's read verses 5 and 6 of chapter 3, where the worst thing that's ever happened for the human race happened. The tempter says, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. That's a wicked half-truth. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. You're not supposed to be like God, deciding what's good and evil. You're supposed to humble yourself and let God decide